Good morning, everyone. This is Gillian Wishart from SEED. And thank you very much for joining us today. We've got a few people just coming into the room, which I'm admitting as we go. But I would just like to take this opportunity on behalf of the entire panel, which I'll introduce you to in a second, to thank you for your engagement in joining with us this morning. What we're going to talk about is innovating together apart. It's very much how we can look at delivering real-time innovation, and we will look at how a heavily distributed environment works. And the panel that you've got today will give a case study and just show exactly the art of the possible. So on behalf of SEED, I would like you to introduce you to the panel. I have Dave Kerr, who is the CTO of Smart Crowds. I have the pleasure of introducing Dr. Elaine Marley, who's from iBeer Farm, Rome, and also Graham Crombie, who's been a great ambassador and worked with SEED for a long, long time. So delighted to have the three presenters with us today. What we will look at is how we can be productive, I think, at looking at vital business competencies. And I think what will come out of the case study and the messages today is really about technology and innovation and how to be productive. And in terms of some housekeeping, if I may, what we will do is this is being recorded. We will be able to share this to all participants. We'll look at the questions. So we have the chat room. So if you have questions that you'd like to place as you go, put them in the chat room. We will look at that and we will work out some of the key thematic areas. And at the end, we'll have 10 to 15 minutes opportunity for us to put those messages to the panel. And obviously the assurance is if we don't have any time or we've run out of time, we will obviously make sure that all the questions that we have, we will follow up on as well. So without further ado, I would like to pass you on to Dave, who is leading the panel and the key facilitator today, and he will lead us through the presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that, Gillian, and welcome to everyone who's joined us today. So as per the title of today's webinar, we're going to take a look at some of the challenges that organisations face as they're looking to get their innovation programmes back on track, following a period of downtime probably. So whilst the focus is going to be on how a more distributed workforce might impact on this, a key thing that we're going to look at today as well is, it does feel like it's a bit of a unique moment in time where organisations, certainly many that we're talking to, are taking a real critical look at how they did things before, with a view to perhaps not just accepting that the old way that was just about okay is fine, but actually we're looking for ways to do things better going forward in the innovation sphere. So to explore this a bit further, we're going to look at a real life innovation project that Elaine and Graham delivered at our biofarm Rhone. And first of all, look at how that project was delivered in a kind of traditional office-based face-to-face work group setting, and then look at ways in which this might be improved in a more distributed setting going forward. So Elaine, if we could maybe just start with you, can you maybe provide some background on the project that we're focusing on today, please?
Sure, sure, Dave. So our biofarm Rhone are part of our biofarm group. Their headquarters is in Germany, and we have a global distribution network. Excuse me, the Glasgow site developed and manufactured test kits for the food and feed industry, and we've worked with Graham for over 10 years, developing and executing our company strategy. In 2017, Graham suggested that we use a structured innovation process to address a key strategic challenge. And the first step of the process was to describe the challenge clearly and concisely so that we could engage another kind of range of people from the business with different skills and backgrounds who were also geographically distributed.
Yeah, that's right, Elaine. Hi. Well, I'm a mechanical engineer by training, which is how come I'm connected to SEED, as Gillian mentioned earlier on, and started work in the 80s with Philips Electronics, originally manufacturing and new product development. So I've been involved in innovation since those days. But again, as Elaine said, been working with our Biofarm for about 10 years on sort of strategy development, strategy execution. And yeah, our Biofarm's a science business, and R&D and new product development is a very important part of what they do. And in all that sort of 10-year period, we've sort of always or frequently talked about the possibility of trying to introduce a more structured process for innovation, maybe find ways to help the innovation process be faster, maybe more efficient, more reliable. And that would something that we thought that our Biofarm might benefit from. So we tried some various innovation tools in some limited fashion, but when we were doing the refresh on strategy back in 2017, this project emerged as a strategically important project for the business. And it just sort of sat up nicely as a vehicle, perhaps, for trying to introduce a broader, more structured approach to innovation. Is that as you recall, Elaine?
Yeah, sure. So from the kind of the review of strategy, we identified a commercial issue with an existing product. We felt the market was constrained because to use our Biofarm product, we had to also use equipment from a sole supplier. And the partnership worked well and is working well for our Biofarm as it's allowed automation of our technology. However, the high capital outlay for the equipment really means that large labs with high sample throughput can only justify the expenditure, and so we felt we weren't really getting all of the market. So the challenge was to find a different use or a way to package the active component of the product so that smaller labs could also afford to use it and we would increase the potential market. So the next stage of the innovation process was Graham facilitated a brainstorming workshop with about 20 people from the business, and we generated over 100 ideas that might address the strategic challenge. We then, a smaller team, reviewed these ideas and we ranked the ones we felt were truly innovative, and then we took 2 ideas on to the next step, the exploration stage.
Elaine, just on that, I mean, Graham mentioned earlier that, as you know yourself, RBR is very much in the business of R&D and new products. I'm guessing your team already had that. Once you got to this exploration stage, did your team have the required skills to do that based on things they have done before?
Well, although we have a track record of bringing new product to market, the approach Graham was introducing us to was very different. We had never worked in this way before, and so we needed Graham really to coach project teams through a series of activities that would give us a quick go, no-go decision on the projects. And what we found was we had really positive feedback from subsidiaries, customers and equipment suppliers. So the positivity kind of helped maintain momentum at this stage and really kept key stakeholders on board. In the end, we chose to adapt an existing product for use with off-the-shelf equipment, which small labs were likely to have on the bench. And also it would mean that we would future-proof automation of our technology.
Yeah, this project was pretty typical, or we were trying to introduce a process that would we would typically use in other settings in terms of the stages we go through. And the slide that's just come up really just shows that kind of start to finish process. And Elaine's already mentioned that the start point was really defining the challenge, and that emerged from that refresh of our biofarm strategy, and that's good. We like innovations to be sort of strategically founded. It just means that the projects are likely to get the correct level of attention and support from senior management. I mean, another sort of generic requirement we think is because innovation is going to involve a lot of different people in different functions, different parts of business, different geographies. Good collaboration is really an essential, and therefore communication also becomes essential. I mean, usually, if it's innovation, you're doing something that's not been done before. So there's a lot of opportunity for misunderstandings, for misinterpretation, for confusion. And whilst, you know, I wouldn't want to suggest that communication is, you know, all it's about, you know, through this structured process, we were trying to really improve communication all the way through. So we used standard communication templates from the beginning, starting with the challenge itself, and all the different stages had sort of features that were connected to improving communication. Probably felt quite different for you and your colleagues, Elaine.
Yeah, absolutely. We'd never defined an innovation project so clearly before, or reached out to so many co-workers.
Yeah, and that bit, that kind of defining is really important. I couldn't overestimate the importance of getting that bit right, and getting us off on the right foot. So once that challenge is set, we are heading towards a sort of focused idea session, brainstorming or similar. And that's a good way to have a set piece like that to get a lot of different ideas, which is important for us. Volume of ideas is very important for this process. Again, as Elaine said, our biofarm chose to involve about 20 people in this process. Fairly typical. We want to make sure that we're getting good diversity in that group. It's you know, people from different functions, different lengths of service. People from outside the business often can be involved as well. So, you know, that's a challenge in itself, especially when you've got perhaps a kind of distributed group already. And, you know, different stages of the process, that becomes quite difficult. And I mean, maybe on the way through today, we'll probably look at 2 or 3 of those different steps that probably, given the kind of world of work that we're in at the moment, might need to be addressed differently, or we might need to find improved ways of doing that. And we, for example, we use a process called stepping stones, where we're looking to gather bits of information to help us develop better, more innovative ideas to get started. The selection process as part of this exercise is typically, again, a face-to-face activity where good communication and decision-making is essential. And then the exploration phase, where things can really get messy. You know, there's very little solidity to the project at the outset. A lot of options, a lot of uncertainties, a lot of unknowns. And you're trying to make good progress, again, with a widely distributed group. Pretty difficult. Do you remember that, Elaine?
Yeah, absolutely. What I liked about this phase was the biggest uncertainties and risks were dealt with from the very beginning. It was a kind of fast learning phase. And the other key thing that came out of it for us was we had to demonstrate the financial viability of the project. And this information was key, and it informed how we approached equipment suppliers.
Yeah, we do treat that sort of stage as a sort of rapid learning exercise, and we try to use the learning language a lot. And it's really about trying to help reduce uncertainties, grow confidence, and also to do it fast and cheap. And obviously it was something new for the folks at our biofarm. Looking back, Elaine, do you think that worked for yourself and your colleagues?
Yeah, definitely. It was easier for people to contribute meaningfully at each stage, and the steps were very clear. Yeah, and also the brainstorming sessions which you facilitated, Graham, people were encouraged to say the ridiculous, you know, and present ideas without really knowing how to deliver them.
I mean, it sounds a bit, Elaine, as though the process that Graham has introduced to you it was quite straightforward, went pretty much plain sailing for you. Is that a fair reflection of it?
No, it was a lot of hard work. And there was logistical issues, you know, we had folk trying to align calendars. We were flying folk from the Netherlands and Germany. Throughout the process, not everyone could make every meeting, and so they would join the meetings via teleconference. It was good to have their input, but I think it was difficult for them to follow the meeting. I guess now it would be impossible to get 20 people into a meeting room and maintain social distancing.
Yeah, it's not going to be easy going forward, that type of approach. And I guess based on some of the things you mentioned there about, you know, flying people back and forth and trying to get their input, do you feel that you managed to get the volume and variety of feedback that were adequate to make the decisions back then?
Well, it was the most feedback we ever had so early on in a project. However, we didn't involve the global network of subsidiaries and distributors who have face-to-face contact with the customers. We only had time to involve a few key subsidiaries. So I think I can see this making that easier, you know. Yeah.
And Graham, given that you might work, I think you are planning to work with Elaine on future innovation projects that will probably require a more distributed approach. What do you see as being the biggest challenges that you're going to face doing that?
Well, I think the obvious thing that you think is going to be different is the idea session. I mean, just as Elaine said, are we really going to be able to get 20 people in a room easily from different parts of the world? Probably not. So, and that is definitely a challenge, because, you know, we get people in a room like that because amongst the things that we get is spontaneity, energy, you know, people sparking off one another, and that adds great value at that stage. So if we're not going to have that, then we need something to replace the kind of creative output that produces. So that, at the moment, as I'm thinking about it, it probably means that we're going to have to lean more heavily on using the stepping stones part of the process that I mentioned earlier. Maybe just means that we need more of those, better quality, and that they can be shared more easily amongst sort of people involved, because we still want to have lots of ideas. It's just how we're going to get those. I think communication is also, again, I don't want to sort of harp on communication, but it is important. It's a bit of an art, you know, when it comes to idea definition, for example. You know, too long can be as bad as too brief. And, you know, when it gets to the stage of selecting ideas that we're going to work on, you know, there's no doubt that ideas that have got a much, or so ideas that are better communicated have got a much better chance of being shortlisted and therefore going forward. So, and that's absolutely critical when it comes to exploring those ideas, as you'll probably remember, Elaine.
Yeah, absolutely. When it became apparent that we would need to approach customers and subsidiaries and suppliers to address the uncertainties and risks, it felt quite daunting. However, we had defined the core idea so well that the sessions kind of took care of themselves and we got excellent feedback. This also helped keep the management team on board, and they prioritised this project. Otherwise, it just wouldn't have happened.
Yeah, funnily enough, Elaine, preparing for this session, I had a wee look back through my sort of project history for this project, and I had something like, well over 600 emails that related to this project, and I was on the outside, you know, so I'd hate to think what your inbox was like. It's a lot of people to coordinate, a lot of work, delivering key tasks. I'm really kind of hoping there's an easier way, Dave.
Yeah, I mean, I think, Graham, obviously I'm on here to talk about smart crowds and technology solutions. I think any technology solution, the whole purpose of it is to make the process and the management of information easier, make things more accessible to everyone in the team, and that's just as true for an innovation management technology solution as any other. So I've got a few slides that I'd like to touch on that a bit later. Before we get to that though, Graham, if you mentioned stepping stones and the select session and the exploration phase as being key, particularly when communication is concerned. I wonder if we can maybe just go back to them and delve into them a little bit more. So stepping stones, what is that in your book?
Okay, well, stepping stones is, you can think of it as a catalyst that helps us to think a bit differently about a problem or a situation. So, you know, if we want genuinely new ideas, then usually we need people to be thinking a bit differently, not thinking in the usual ways. And you'll see the slide there, what it's trying to illustrate is that if we're kind of left to our own devices, and especially if we're under pressure, time deadlines, those kind of things, then it becomes hard to look at situations or problems from a different perspective. You know, we know that there's new ideas kind of out there somewhere, but you know, the kind of pressure and our normal way of thinking kind of drives us towards, you know, where we usually end up. Now, okay, some obvious ideas lobbed in, no problem, that's good, that's useful. But if we really do want to have a kind of broad range of very different ideas, then stepping stones can help us do that. And you know, how our brain works kind of gets in the way a wee bit. There's an example that's kind of oft quoted. And to sort of show the value of that example, one way of defining creativity or creative thinking is it's the ability to identify self-imposed constraints, remove them, and explore the consequences of their removal. So in other words, we will all have sort of blockages that we're not aware of that kind of stop us thinking about opportunities or problems in a different way. So women's swimwear, for example, a few years ago, the design of women's swimwear was constrained in terms of the materials that could be used, the patterns, you know, design, etc., because of an obvious assumption. And that obvious assumption was that, you know, swimsuits would frequently be exposed to salt water or chlorinated water as people went swimming. Well, somebody discovered that actually 90% of swimsuits never get wet, except in the laundry. Okay, it's a kind of completely obvious assumption to make, but it wasn't necessarily, you know, true. So that kind of assumption blocked our ability to see different things. I mean, who would have thought that you would ever buy a swimsuit with a tag that said dry clean only? So in a sense, a stepping stone is a kind of reliable way of exposing limiting constraints. So it helps us to see those constraints, otherwise we just wouldn't be able to see them. And they block our ability to see things differently. So a stepping stone you could also think of as a bit of a blockage in our normal thinking path. And that blockage allows us to kind of think outside, to think differently, to look at it differently. DuPont, for example, they, although it can be a difficult process finding stepping stones, they used a very simple process when they were developing Kevlar and Lycra, where they used a very simple technique called random word, where they just used a dictionary to find words that they would try to associate directly with their challenge. And you know, the DuPont company reports that they had great success that they may not otherwise have had developing those two very important materials. So we like to have teams gathering a wide range of different types of stepping stones for a project. And you know, that may be, and sharing them so that they can use those for idea generation. And I guess that might be more of a challenge in the new world of work.
Yeah, I guess you know, that's exactly where technology solutions, cloud systems like smart crowds can play an increasingly important role. So we have been working to bring concepts like inspirations into smart crowds. We actually have a completely different name for it. We call it brain fuel within smart crowds. Just brought up a slide at the moment which shows it's a fictional innovation challenge within the system. You'll see here that you know, the brain fuel aspect is an integral part of that challenge. So as well as describing what you're trying to achieve in the challenge, we're given everyone access to the brain fuel feature to enable them to not just develop their own lines of thinking, but actually help develop other people's lines of thinking. It is available to everyone. There's no point in restricting it to just people in the innovation team. So if you've got a wider business that are, contributing their ideas to the challenge, they should all have access to this. Because what you'll find is that something, a little inspiration that's a piece of brain fuel that's of little use to one person could be, I guess, like gold dust to someone else. And that could be something as simple as a photo that you've taken on your smartphone, a little snippet you've seen from a newspaper, a video you've seen on the web. It doesn't even need to be from the same industry that you work on, because sometimes these little snippets can come from a different industry, but it's enough to spark your thinking that, well, that might be useful in this challenge in some guys. So making it easy to share that straight into the platform and then for everyone to see it is a really important aspect. And as the next slide shows, a key requirement of this type of thing is a consistent format. You'll find with any innovation project, there will be an innovation project leader or facilitator. It helps them keep track much more easily of the brain fuel, the snippets that have been added. So we can use things like real-time notifications to keep the facilitator up to track, up to speed of the things that have been added. And it enables that project leader to, I guess, intervene if people are maybe not getting the gist of what's required and what type of brain fuel is going to be helpful. Also enables the leader to maybe spot some underrepresented areas. So he or she can post some extra things themselves just to make sure there's good coverage, maybe some special areas of interest. And I think one point I'd like to make in this is that, because we get asked, well, where does brain fuel come from, or inspirations? And in our experience, working with clients, an excellent area to start with trying to find this information to post into the challenge can be by running surveys or consultations with staff, with customers, suppliers, partners, etc. Because what you'll find is that the responses that you get to those consultations and surveys are just absolutely chock-out full of really great information that can be used as brain fuel to support that challenge. So it's quite an interesting area for us. Graham, if we can maybe just go back, I just think you went back, you talked about the select session earlier on. Can we maybe just cover that in a bit of detail and why the face-to-face work group approach has maybe been optimal for this in the past?
Yeah, sure, Dave. I mean, I think Elaine mentioned we had over 100 ideas related to this challenge earlier on. I mean, the slide that's there is just trying to, I guess, give a feel for what it's like being confronted with a whole range of ideas that are possibly useful and relevant. So it's obviously difficult to sift through these, and we have done that typically face-to-face, maybe over one or several sessions. I think if we're going to be trying to do this more remotely, then it's likely, or I'm imagining, that we might need to have much more structure and transparency around that process. How do we do this? It's difficult, when you're in the same room, you can use your skills to identify kind of body language cues and signals, and it's not as easy to do that in the kind of format that we're using today. To actually go through the process, the first order of business usually is just check with alignment with the challenge. So is the idea that we've got communicated hopefully in a way that allows you to test whether or not it fits with the challenge that was set. I think the other two things that we're interested in at this stage is the degree of uniqueness. How unique is this? And what the likely impact is. Just one wee thing to kind of point out here is that, a lot of times, maybe understandably, teams will be keen to pursue ideas that they perceive to have a high impact and are easy to do. And easy to do might mean fewer uncertainties, depends, but we're keen to make sure that they also include in maybe their portfolio that they want to take forward ideas that have maybe got higher uncertainties, ideas that appear harder to do, because the likelihood is, to be honest, that more innovative ideas are going to be in that kind of group. It's important as well not to get too concerned at this stage with looking for what you might think of as the best idea. Okay, I've seen work groups spend an awful lot of time sort of trying to sort of figure out, you know, what's the best idea here, and we're not absolutely sure that such a thing actually exists. I don't know if you remember that, Elaine.
Yeah, absolutely. I do recall it, and I think it's now that I've been through the process, I can absolutely see that the notion of the best idea isn't relevant at this stage, because the ideas that are selected are developed and improved later in the process. That said, it is tempting to select the ideas that we had the know-how to deliver and believe that these were the best ideas. But again, I think the innovation process kind of keeps you right.
Yeah, as I say, it's extremely difficult to identify what best looks like at this stage. So really what we're hoping for is that we've just got a bunch of good or maybe even very good ideas. As I've said already, Dave, selection takes place over a series of meetings, maybe where a small group trawls through the ideas, and they're trying to get good consensus on a kind of handful that they would take forward. As I say, typically done that face-to-face, probably need a different way of doing that to accommodate new ways of working. Do you have a view on that, Dave?
Yeah, I mean, I can see why the office-based, face-to-face setting has been maybe optimal for this in the past to get that consensus. Excuse me. I think again, this is where technology solutions can really help to bring that more distributed workforce into the filtering selections process. Excuse me. As you can see from the current slide that's up, so here we're showing the Smart Crowd solution. It's enabling more and more people to get involved in their own reactions to the ideas that have been submitted in a challenge. So what that's bringing is what we refer to as the weight of opinion. It can be reactions, thumbs up, thumbs down, ratings and all that sort of thing. What that does is it helps the innovation team or the challenge team to get those ideas, because there could be lots of them, there could be 100 plus in a particular challenge, to get them into some sort of workable order to then start dealing with in a more systematic way. So, for example, using that weight of opinion to shortlist the most exciting ones, maybe to set some that are too planned, which look like absolute no-brainers, we just need to get on with them. And then for maybe the ones that are a bit less interesting, we'll just discount them for now. We can always come back to them later. Set them to not plan now doesn't mean that that's it, we'll never come back to them. But we do need to get that list into a shorter form. And for those that are shortlisted or planned, what we typically recommend within the system, and the system takes you through this process in Smart Crowds, is to carry out some domain expert assessment to validate that weight of opinion that you've already got from the wider group across your business. So as this example shows, there are 4 expert opinions that have been garnered here. So it supports multiple assessments from multiple people for that wider point of view. You know, for example, you could be bringing in people from corporate responsibility and sustainability, from a technical perspective, a customer perspective. And we recommend normally focusing on that level of assessment for, you know, at maximum maybe 10 of the most interesting ideas in a challenge, maybe even just 5, but certainly no more than 10. To keep the process efficient, to limit the effort that the challenge team is going to have to put into this at this stage. But always knowing that you've got to always provide some feedback to everyone, even on the ones that are not set to planned.
Yeah, I can see it being really useful, being able to involve the entire workforce, that they can react and rate ideas. That would certainly help challenge the kind of normal thinking of research and marketing. Also, the discussion on ideas in Smart Crowds seems like a great feature. It would allow more people to get involved and more conversations to be had.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, and I think, you know, widening the sources of feedback and discussion is really important to build that traction and momentum for the ideas that look interesting and you're thinking of taking forward. In fact, you can actually go further with consultation and some innovation platforms, and again, Smart Crowds does support this. So using the survey and consultations feature, you can really carry out any number of reviews and surveys to support that process. So what that does is it enables teams to get really rapid, detailed insight and opinions from individuals or groups, people from different functions, different organisations, and depending on the organisation, possibly also from citizens via full public surveys by posting on your Twitter page. And it's bringing all that information right back into the specific ideas that you're considering taking forward. You can see in the right-hand side of the slide that's up at the moment, the highlighted one has got 5 consultations that have been run against that particular example idea. So yeah, again, bringing conversation and feedback in, and we see it as being a key aspect of technology solutions within the innovation space. Graham, again, if we could go back to the earlier discussion again, you talked about the other aspect that was really important for collaboration, the exploration phase. I wonder if you could give me a bit more information about that from your perspective, and why, again, office-based group working was critical to that.
Yeah, okay, Dave. So, I mean, most folk will know that innovation really just isn't about a good idea. In fact, a good idea, if you're lucky, is about 10% of the innovation. There's an awful lot of stuff that needs to be figured out from that initial communication of a specific idea. So exploration is that phase where we explore the idea, we find out about the idea, and that's really where a process that good collaboration is essential. Depending on the situation in the organisation, that could be a wide range of people, but all of the time what we're looking for are these individuals or groups to complete rapid learning cycles, to use that learning terminology again, all the time laser focused on the mission. But at this stage of the game, there's an awful lot of moving parts from the outset, and we need to be, or it would help to be able to keep all of these moving parts in view across all of the all the people involved, all of the interested parties at this stage. And that really is a big challenge. You remember how difficult that was, Elaine?
Yes, it was difficult because, yeah, there was just so, as you say, so many moving parts, but we focused on weekly challenges to address uncertainties, and it was key to keep the momentum of the stakeholders. And Graham, you were a hard taskmaster at this stage.
Okay, if you say so. Well, I mean, as you'll recall, it was all about, we were trying to build momentum, and we really wanted to make sure that that momentum was maintained as we tried to move ideas towards commercialization. And the process that we use, again, this will be very familiar to a lot of people, the standard PDSA cycle, although, maybe when Elaine talks about me being a hard taskmaster, we might use that PDSA cycle in a bit more of a kind of disciplined fashion. But it's all about, small scale tests, experiments, trials, surveys, rough cut prototypes at this stage, as long as they're kind of fast and cheap. And we like weekly cycles. We think that kind of weekly cycle for project teams is ideal to help them work through the uncertainties, get to the point of being able to make a recommendation to either kill the idea or to move on to development. But the learnings that we get from each of those cycles usually end up being built into the detailed spec. Was that, as you remember, Elaine?
Yeah, absolutely. We explained the idea to customers and subsidiaries and asked them what would stop them using the product. And we hadn't entered the lab yet, so we hadn't committed to a single approach. And the innovation process created a space for us to spend time discussing the learning and improve the idea. So really it led to increased confidence in the project and consensus across the team.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Elaine. The early stage of PDSA is all about, you're trying to get a starting point, really. And your initial ideas may need to change. Oftentimes you have teams that pivot away correctly from what seemed like a good idea to start with. But discipline and focus, and again, good communication really helps with that. Dave, to be honest, I've always found the exploration phase probably the most difficult to deliver during an innovation project. We'd often typically do it through 1 hour weekly conference calls, but even these can be tricky to conduct, trying to make sure that people are working on the same page and using the same information and reaching good conclusions. I'm assuming that a cloud-based platform would be able to help with that.
Yeah, I think that's true, Graham. I think when you're talking about learnings and getting everything down so that the whole team has got access to the right information at the right time, I think that's where cloud solutions are extremely useful. It's all about transparency. So the slide that's just come up here, we were showing within the Smart Crowds platform, the ability for the team to identify and work through these cycles of assumptions here, where we're listing out various uncertainties and unknowns that are going to be worked through in the project. And what that does is it enables that systematic approach to be taken, but everyone in the team has got access to that information. So you're listing and working through the riskiest assumptions first, and working your way through that list, and hopefully getting to recommending the investment at the end. And the next slide that's up, where we're jumping into one of the PDSA cycles here. So you see within here that we've got the ability to assign actions and tasks to people, record the progress that's been made and the decisions that are being made during each of these exploration cycles. And that's effectively recording those learnings all the way. So at the end of a specific cycle, we've got some decisions to make. We can either stop because we just can't take this idea any further. We've hit a brick wall when it comes to one of the uncertainties, and we need to just go back and maybe choose a different idea now, maybe the next most exciting one. Or we can pause because we need to do a bit more work from the learnings that have come in. Or we can continue to the next uncertainty cycle, or if actually we've kind of reached the end of our PDSA cycles and we've not had any red lights, then we can actually go. We can green light the project and move to the implementation phase. So I think consistency and transparency at this stage are even more critical for distributed teams. I think anyone in the team or anyone who follows the idea is going to be kept updated anytime any new activity is added. So people can come back in and add their own comments to help move the actions forward, just because of a notification that's come in when they've seen a little bit of activity on it, and it's prompted their thinking on it. And it does act as a great offset against the benefits that you've mentioned earlier, Graham, of a kind of closer proximity, face-to-face work group setting, where the more regular informal discussions and people who are maybe more likely to stumble across some hidden beliefs, etc., because they're in that face-to-face setting.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, Dave. I mean, I think there's no doubt that this activity requires an awful lot of coordination. And I like the sound of the transparency in the organisation of the workflows, as you've described them there. That I can imagine that would really help keep people on track. Do you think it would have helped in the project we worked on, Elaine?
Yeah, for sure it would have helped us. Not all the folk involved were Glasgow based, and I think the improved visibility of the outcome of the PDSA cycles would mean that everyone could stay informed more easily, maybe prevent misunderstandings and make it easier to maintain momentum.
Yeah, I think that's true, really. And given what you've heard in today's discussion about how the innovation process can be adapted with technology to maybe support a more distributed remote workforce, would you feel confident that our biofarm would be able to continue to innovate successfully, or even better, going forward using some of the tools and methods we've talked about today?
Yeah, for sure. Cloud based platforms definitely sound interesting. I think even it would probably benefit us, even if we weren't in a kind of lockdown situation, but for sure, I think it becomes even more critical in this current situation. It would definitely help us to coordinate and manage the innovation process. And it's easier for, as all the information is available to all participants in kind of real time. I think it would also allow us to involve more subsidiaries and distributors, which again were limited the way we did it previously. And I think this could also help embed innovation into a business, as it provides a meeting place for staff to get involved in innovation, and spend some time each day just looking at what's going on and perhaps comment on an idea.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting for me, I guess, to hear your thoughts on this, Elaine, and also some of the points that Graham also made earlier, and yourself, on the subjects of brain fuel and idea selection sessions. It feels to me that whilst a great outcome was achieved in your project, you might have been a little bit working with your hands, certainly one hand tied behind your back, without access to solutions that could have made things just that little bit easier. Maybe a kind of untapped opportunity to make the process work a bit harder for you. I think when you get more people involved, widen the pool of inspirations, build that weight of opinion to help during the selection process, that's where these types of tech solutions can really add a new dimension to an innovation project. And just a final thought from me, it does strike me that whilst these things are even more important now with all the significant increase in distributed working that's going to be happening, I think in fact it's actually probably what organised should have been looking to do more of before the kind of COVID crisis struck. So yeah, it's an interesting takeaway from my point of view. So I'm getting a nod here from Gillian. I think we've come to the end of the allotted time today, so I suspect you're keen to move on to the wrap up and questions, Gillian.
Thank you very much, Dave. Appreciate that. Chat room has kept me busy. Stuart and I, who's in the background as well, working the slides. Really what's come out of the chat room, and I'd like to put this to the panel, the whole theme has been working together apart. We've talked about the new normal being more about virtual reality, how we need to be strong on engagement and people skills. There are multiple platforms that are out there. We talk about Zoom, we talk about Teams, they all have different functionality. So I think from those that have participated, and again, thank you, what do you think are the best ways of engaging with a distributed workforce, how to get the collaboration and really generate the ideas and the creativity that we've talked about? I think one of the things I've picked up on from what's been said today, it's the permission to participate. No idea is a bad idea. So I think perhaps, to get your ideas individually and collectively from your experience, because that's been a great case study, that would be really helpful.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll just jump in here first, Gillian. I think we've been working with Graham on a number of projects where, from our perspective, once the challenge has been defined, getting it out to as wide a number of people in the organisation as possible is always a good thing. And I think enabling them to just get their ideas in early, because what will happen at that point is that typically ideas can be quite rough, they're kind of draft, they are in very early stage, they're more like concepts. But that's all good. And in fact, those concepts themselves very much act like further kind of pieces of brain fuel or stepping stones that can then be taken into what we would still always recommend a work group. And at this point, I think you'd then be looking at a Zoom or a Teams work group setting to do a idea generation session. And Graham, what was it you call it? It's not a generation, you call it the idea You have a name for that session?
Ideation session, creativity session.
Yeah, okay. So we always encourage getting as much input as early on from as wide a group as people, and using that information to for the innovation team who are going to be really focusing on the challenge to actually generate more ideas. Graham, any further thoughts from you?
Well, I mean, I think there's obviously, you would imagine that you're going to be at some stage or stages of the process that you're going to have to use something like Zoom or Teams or something, you know, for those sort of collaborative pieces. But as I said earlier on, it remains to be seen that I am a wee bit anxious about how well they will work compared to, standard folk in a room. And I know a lot of people have been doing a lot of that stuff already, or since lockdown, and that's good. So, I mean, I think the Brain Fuel facility in Smart Crowds, as an example, facilities like that can just, I think, take a bit of the pressure off and allow for more creativity, even though people are going to be likely to be working more on their own. And I think also worth bearing in mind that an awful lot of the innovation process isn't about people necessarily just sitting in rooms, but it's actually just about being able to keep track and have good communication and good transparency. So I think, however you do that, that's going to be important moving forward.
Yeah, I think for sure we'll need Zoom or Teams, but I think what something like Smart Crowds could provide is, the ideas are rated and ranked and structured prior to the meeting to discuss the ideas and explore them and rank them and all of that. So, and I think everyone sees everything real time. That just wasn't possible the way that we did it.
Yeah. I think another point to make in this, I guess, is that even with things like Teams, it's very straightforward to integrate challenges. If you've got a challenge, at the end of the day, it's a link to a URL that will take you straight into that challenge. These things can be posted on your Teams channels, so Teams can always act as a mechanism for distributing that announcement that there's a new challenge out there, and acting as an easy way for people to get into it just via a simple link. So these tools can all work together very effectively. They're all sitting on the Microsoft platform, the Microsoft Cloud platform, so they're all pretty well integrated at the end of the day.
I think I heard as well through the whole piece of the transformation with the case study that you've shared with us, it's all about accelerated learning. And I sat here with my pen and I've written energy, spontaneity, creativity, and I think that whole piece is just enabling the culture. I think as well, Elaine, what you said at the very beginning was about commerciality and how you came up with ideas, but they were business-based. They had, I think, validity, and they were seen by the business to be recognisable. But Graham, I don't think I fancy your inbox with your 600 emails.
Yeah, I know that was, but I think that is a measure of how much work is involved and how much coordination and how much communication. I mean, it's tough to keep track of all that stuff and make sure that it's moving forward with pace. We don't want the momentum to kind of leak out of the process. So, getting people roped together, moving forward together is difficult. And the 600 email thing was just, as I say, it was just a kind of reminder to me of what that was like. And as I say, Elaine would have been much more than that, I guess. So, anything that can help with that got to be useful.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point, Gillian and Graham, that when you're in this PDSA cycle part, you're working through your exploration cycles and you're trying to get through work quickly. Graham talks about weekly cycles. When you're assigning work out to people to capture learnings at each stage so that you can move quickly, putting deadlines on people for work and giving them automated reminders when they've missed a deadline for it, because you know that the project leader is going to be on your back the next day to get that information. Again, that's where these innovation management systems like SmartCrowds can really help to keep people informed of what they need to do by when, and make sure the work just keeps that momentum going.
Yeah, that would be good for me, Dave, because that would mean that I could lose the hard taskmaster title that Elaine gave me, and then it becomes the system, it's not me. So I'd be all up for that.
Yeah, I think also what I like is the idea that everything is visible, all of the learning is visible, because I found that I would have, you know, very similar conversations, updating people with the same information, but they hadn't heard it. So I think if it's all there and visible, it would definitely have made my life a lot easier.
Yeah, and again, just back to that visibility thing, the kind of mix and match of technologies. I mean, obviously, you would expect these types of platforms to enable you to build up a document library as you're going, because sometimes it's not just the little bits you're writing, but you're associating and uploading documents. But the way certainly SmartCrowds and I'm sure some other innovation management platforms have been designed is that they'll support links just as well as uploads. So if you've already got your own in-house Teams or SharePoint repository that is your standard place for storing things, the documents can all ultimately be stored there, all the knowledge that's been built up, but they can all be collated together in a single document library within an idea that's being progressed, so that everything is at your fingertips just when you need it. You're not hunting all over the place for it.
Yeah, I think are you able to, sorry Graham.
No, you go, Elaine.
Are you able to search? You know, so if you've got an idea that you saw and it's really useful, are you able to search keywords to pull out information?
Yeah, again, I mean, that is kind of typical of these platforms, that a fully searchable repository of information is there. In fact, we use something that's pretty much similar to Yahoo/Google search, so every single word is referenced and searchable. So you're not having to decide which words make up part of the index that is searchable. It'll find anything that you've entered, which can always be really handy.
Yeah, I mean, I think what I was going to say, Elaine, was that early stages, especially with innovation, there's so much fluidity. But as you know, at various points, you need to tie things down. You need to have, you know, progressions of solidity. You need to have, you need to know where you are every different stage, and everybody needs to know where you are. And that's a difficult thing. That's a very difficult thing.
Okay, some closing comments from the panel before I let everyone back to their kettle, because we're scheduled to finish at 11 o'clock. So thank you for your engagement. Graham, Elaine, Dave, any final comments just before I do a summary?
Happy for Dave, for you to kind of sum up, if you like.
Yeah, I guess just from my perspective, yeah, it's been interesting just to look at the projects, the project you've covered today, Elaine and Graham, from a more traditional point of view, and I think it's clear that there are lots of opportunities to look at better ways of doing things, and it's not just something that's happened because of you know, the recent crisis we've all come through, but I think it now kind of exacerbates the need to actually find solutions that bring more and more people from the organisation into the process, build that momentum, and just make it more likely that ideas will become innovation. So yeah, it's been a really interesting conversation.
Well, I think it's very thought-provoking. And as I say, there's still information coming through on the chat room, still lots of engagement. So a really good session. And on behalf of SEED, it's absolutely about partnership. It's just been amazing to have everyone on the panel sharing experiences, the good, the bad and the ugly, which I think is important. So thank you very much indeed. We have all of the SEED team on our call today, which is fantastic as well. So thanks to Joe Chiti, who's our MD, my colleagues Dave and Victoria, who are BDMs, and our new member who's joined us on our cluster building activity, Jane, who's our marketing executive. So on behalf of SEED, thank you so much for the time and the effort. Joe, I see you've got your mic on potentially. If there's anything else you would like to say on behalf of SEED, you're very
I think
welcome.
Grant's answered that he's jumped off, but one of our partner projects for advancing manufacturing was on the call. So I was going to ask Grant whether he wanted to have a further chat, but we'll follow up later. So
Perfect. Okay. All right. Thank you all very much indeed. As I say, this has been a great partnership event with SEED. Do keep an eye out on our website. We have lots of interesting events that are coming up on our calendar. So by all means, keep an eye out, but you have our contact details. We look forward to welcoming you to the next event in the future. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you.